All right, what's going on,
I was,
macro
I was
perspective?
kidding. You can go ahead and start the intro, dude.
Give me
We'll
the
do it
intro.
live. We're doing it live.
We're doing it live. Welcome to New York City. No, what's going on, macro perspective peeps? Man, I'm stumbling over my words now. We got Susan Lopez on, better known as the Tactical Dietitian. Where we talk, we got connected with her with Jason, one of our working pals at Synergenics. Kind of just, he spoke
It's
highly of
your
you.
ex-working pal, bro.
My ex working pal, but still like a buddy. I send him memes all the time about like hybrid athletes of like what it means to be a hybrid athlete, and it's like a guy running and it's like out of gas after like 5 feet, but he can lift heavy. Anyways, we have Susan Lopez on, who's the tactical dietitian, and we're gonna talk about like tactical nutrition performance, all these things around, folks that are like first responders, law enforcement, military, firefighters, just kind of all this. And Susan was kind of like one of the best that we recommend. Her credentials go up the wazoo from like a TSAC to a master's to a dietitian. But Susan, real quick, if you could do a real quick like elevator intro of like who you are, how you got into the field, kind of like your quick way of bringing that in.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really kind of happened by accident, is what I like to tell people. So I initially, out of high school, had an Army recruiter come to my school, right? Pretty typical story. Be like, I'm going to show you the world and you'll get to see these amazing things and we'll pay for college and all this stuff. And I'm like, that sounds fantastic. So I signed up for the Army. I left for basic training like a week after high school. I ended up becoming a military cook. So I was an Army cook. And then I went on to do some additional training in nutrition care services, where I essentially became a cook, but in a hospital. And I actually was able to work under some pretty amazing military dietitians. And prior to that, I didn't even know that the field of dietetics existed. So I was brought under their wing, got to do some cool stuff outside of cooking, patient care, patient education, learned a little bit about clinical nutrition, really got my first taste of sports nutrition. And I was kind of hooked from there. And when I left the service 6 years later, I had already made up my mind that I was going to go to school, complete my degree in dietetics, and become a registered dietitian, with the sole intent of being able to go back and work for the military, work with tactical athletes. Like, I didn't really want to work in a hospital or even work in college athletics, because by that time I already had a family and had started having kids. And if for any dietitian who's ever worked in the collegiate space, it's very demanding. Any strength coach or anybody really who's worked in the collegiate space on a performance team, can be very demanding, first one in, last one out. So that definitely was not in my future. So I really wanted to work in tactical before there was a tactical. And I actually entered into my undergrad program the year before the original Army Ranger athlete program started, which was kind of like the great grandfather of what special operations human performance is now. But I worked as a dietitian in a lot of different spaces, in fitness and personal training. I worked for a couple municipalities with their fire departments, police departments for a while. Even I worked for a city hall as their contract dietitian for a little bit. Just lots of different things. And then in about 2020 is when I started my online coaching. And I've been doing that ever since for the better part of those 5 years as tactical dietitian. And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of individuals from police, fire, federal law enforcement, worked with several individuals from some different agencies, just one-on-one with their nutrition. And have just continued to kind of build what I would like to think of as like I guess like a education community of people who want to kind of go beyond basic nutrition and calories and macros, and actually want to learn like the art of nutrition programming, like the nuances behind the periodization. And so that's kind of what my focus is typically on with my clients, is nutrition periodization and actually learning nutrition programming for themselves.
Make sure they don't need you anymore. I just want, before Marco says
Yes.
anything, the whole dietitian field. That's why this is why my wife says she's a clinical dietitian at USC, and it's like there's always a per diem issue, because like dietitians are like starting a family or like they burnt out at this place, so it's like there's always like a rotation. She says so.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many like just amazing like opportunities have, like come my way in the last few years. And I've just had to be like, no, man, like, that sounds fantastic. Like, I'm sure that would be a dream job for somebody, but I have like roots here. Like, I just bought a piece of property, and like 3 months after we bought this piece of property, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put chickens on it, and we're going to have like goats, and we're starting to like put roots down. I had this amazing opportunity come through, but it required like this massive relocation. And I was like, I just can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Seamus, for taking my wind out of my sails there. I feel like, I mean, I'd be doing everybody a disservice if we don't talk more about periodization and how to do that. I feel like it's something we've mentioned. I feel like I say it at times with clients, and they're like, stop using jargon. I was like, jargon? It's like periodization ain't jargon, but really kind of is. So I mean, like, I guess like setting up a plan and what that normal outline might typically look like for, I guess we should pick an avatar. It might be easier. Like what kind of person, Seamus, do you feel like would fit the mold here that would help kind of articulate this?
Well, give it to the expert here, Susan. Let's go with high stressed cop, right? Got to eat the fast food, right? They did their lab work, and their doc is telling them, "Hey, you gotta." Gotta watch your lipid profile. Your TYG is up the wazoo. Your quickie index says this, or your inflammatory markers are like this. They're not sleeping, right? Or maybe they're stressed out of their mind. Yeah, I think that's a perfect one, Marcos.
Okay, well, first things first. You said some jargon there that we need to clarify. TYG, Seamus, what is that?
I'm gonna let Susan, the expert, speak on this.
Okay.
TYG.
Thank you. Thank you. Got nothing? No.
No, it's something index. It's like your
For your
sugar.
triglycerides?
No, not triglycerides. It's like a sugar and fat like absorption. I read all my labs. I'm forgetting the full name right now, but
You've stumped me already.
yeah, I'm already
Show's
stumped
over.
myself.
Show's
Show's
over.
over. No, but
No,
like
Seamus has been deep in these like
functional
functional
biochemistry
diagnostic
analysis every single
lab.
day. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
but no, like
Did you
let's say
say
like a lipid profile. Yeah, I would say that's what is that one again? TYG index, triglyceride
Hold up.
glucose
Let's get
index.
some
There you go.
AI.
There it is.
The triglyceride glucose index? Okay, so it's
Yeah.
combining the two
It's
together.
just like another ratio. Ratios, man. All I know are algorithms, Susan. Like that's why I got a bunch of cute.
Well, there's a lot of ratios. I mean, you can look at like your HDL to LDL, right? Like your insulin to triglycerides to your testosterone to cortisol. Like, I mean, there's a lot we could talk about
There's a
testosterone to
ton.
insulin.
But yeah, let's go with the cop. A1C is high. Lipid profile, kind of like I guess the run of the mill that you deal with. But like even outside of that, like the doc said these things. His nutrition is that of he's on the job, he's doing big shifts, and he's eating like the quick foods, Um, yeah, how would we go about periodization with this? This is like I got to make you think a little bit.
Yeah, no. So we're talking about somebody who's in a high stress situation, has a poor metabolic profile when we look at their blood work, and maybe has some poor nutritional habits. And we'll just assume that they're doing like the bare minimum of like maybe training, right? A couple days a week, strength training, maybe that 150 minutes of cardiovascular fitness each week, maybe. Yeah.
I guess if their job depends on it, we'll assume they're doing it.
Let's just assume they're doing the bare minimum. Okay, maybe not. Yeah, so I'll kind of walk you through the way that I do things if that's kind of what you're looking for. So usually when I'm working with an athlete of that type, right, or who's in that situation, and I refer to all my clients as athletes, whether or not they think they're athletes or not, right? Because we want to kind of develop that mindset, and we want to use some of those strategies that you might see quote unquote an athlete use, but we kind of just bring it down to the level of specificity that that individual needs, right? So typically with someone like that, we want to look at the metabolic situation first, like what's going on with the blood work and what are some of those big rocks that we need to move in order to improve some of that metabolic efficiency, metabolic health, whatever you want to call it. A lot of times, when someone like that comes to me, one of the first things on their mind is, how do I lose weight? How do I lose this body fat? What's my meal plan going to look like? What kind of calories do I need to be taking off of my diet? And that's usually like step 10 sometimes. And really, we need to be focused on step 1, which in the world that I work in is, okay, what are some of the big glaring issues? What are some of the things that you're missing that are creating these issues to begin with, right? Because if your metabolic health isn't there, like, you're not necessarily going to see that outcome that you want to see, whether it be body fat loss or performance or whatnot. We can work on both kind of simultaneously, but we have to hit on that metabolic health. So if we're talking about someone who has an altered lipid panel, some blood sugar issue, usually the first, let's just say, macronutrients we look at are going to be protein and fiber always, right? What is your intake there? Uh, and I guess I should kind of back up a little bit. Like, let's say this individual does have an altered metabolic profile. They do have like a higher body fat percentage. We're typically not going to start somebody off in a deficit. So when we periodize out somebody's plan into like just kind of like a big macro cycle, right? We kind of will break it up into different phases. And so usually the first phase of someone's plan is not going to be a deficit. It's not going to be a diet. It's not going to be, even if there's somebody who wants to like put on a bunch of lean muscle, we don't always necessarily start with those things. We usually start, in the first few weeks, just kind of figuring out what their metabolic response to any type of nutrition stimulus is going to be, right? Because if, let's say, you're someone who does want to lose body fat, if I throw you immediately into a deficit and you don't lose any body fat because you don't have a healthy metabolism to begin with, you're going to get frustrated and I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm doing. I typically don't start with that. So usually it'll like in the first phase, usually we're going to start with hitting some of those big things that somebody has been missing out on. And we might actually not put somebody into a huge deficit right away. We might put them a little bit closer to their maintenance calories, or what we propose their maintenance calories to be, maybe a 10 to 15% deficit, because I just want to see how they're going to respond to that, right? Like, how are you going to respond to it if I give you some structure, or if we talk about some structure? What is that going to look like for you?
Yeah. Susan, one question, like for estimating maintenance for any individual, including this theoretical person, like what is it that like, do you use a calculator or a tool, or they're just kind of like, you look at them and you kind of know at this point after thousands of people? Like, how do you like going about creating that kind of very educated guess?
Yeah, I mean both, right? So if you're one of my coaching clients, I've actually developed like some calculators that are part of the program, right? Because the goal is to teach someone how to do it on their own after they're done working with me. And so we actually have calculators that we've created that have some of that nuance programmed into it, and we actually give it to our clients at the beginning of the program. So we call their periodized plan their high performance roadmap. And so at the beginning of their program, that's one of the first steps that we take, because people do like to get their calories and their macros, even though that sometimes isn't the thing that we prioritize in the beginning. So I will tell you, for most individuals, I will estimate initially their calories using like a Mifflin St. Jour, the BMR calculation. For most people, that gets us pretty close, if they're not an on-site client where I can actually test their RMR or get their actual body composition measurements. And then we use, for like some of our athletes or some of my more high-performing guys, we might actually use like the Catch McArdle, or even the Cunningham formula if I have their lean muscle mass measurements, because that tends to be a little bit more accurate for athletes. But for most of my virtual clients, we're using Mifflin.
Yeah, how valuable do you find RMR for being able to like truly give you this theoretical maintenance calories? Because obviously that would be existing, right? Like just like laying there your active amount of like metabolic burn versus like this guesstimation of activity for an individual that may or may not be more or less sedentary than they give you on their intake.
And
Yeah,
I want
for
to follow up too, Susan, like how useful is it? And then also too, like what's the difference you've seen between a calculated and then when you finally test their RMR, you're like, oh shoot, it is on or it's off. Two-part question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll actually answer the second one first. So, as far as testing, a lot of times they're pretty close. I can usually, when I test someone using the equipment that we have, because I use two different pieces of equipment. So, I have a Core Cardio Coach Pro that I use, and then I also have a Cosmed. They typically are pretty close. Where I see alterations in that resting rate is going to be if somebody has been doing a lot of intermittent fasting, a lot of crash dieting,
Hmm.
or they have a history of thyroid disorders, they will typically be on the low end of normal. Or sometimes I'll even get individuals who are below what's expected.
Like 20-30% difference.
It can vary a little bit. I will tell you, like, a very specific instance I had within the last couple of weeks is I had an individual who had lost a significant amount of weight in the last 3 years using some crash dieting, intermittent fasting, and at one point, I think had followed a ketogenic diet for a short period of time. His RMR actually came in 1,500 calories below the low end of the range,
A
right?
50% difference almost. If he was at 3,000, let's just say.
Yeah, we're gonna do a confirmatory test this coming week and also get some lab work done, of course. But that's probably the biggest one that I've ever seen that I've tested personally. But I have definitely seen individuals come in and they're 10 to 15% lower, right? And I have also seen individuals who, when they're peaking during their training cycle, my more athletic population, that their RMR tends to either be on the higher end or sometimes even above what I would expect it to be, just because they're peaking and they tend to need more recovery calories as well, right? So there's a higher metabolic demand on the body. I have seen that as well.
What's the average and high low you've seen in terms of the calories on this?
The range, are you talking
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
range or just like the differences?
Like literally, yeah. What's the normal typical range, like male, female, and then as well as like what's the highest you've seen?
I mean, it's going to vary by somebody's body composition. The equipment that I work with is typically going to take that into like account when we're doing the calculation off to the side to estimate their activity level, their purposeful exercise. It'll have me put their body comp data in there. Of course, when we're doing the test, we're using oxygen consumption as our measurement. RMR, I hope I'm answering this
Yeah,
to
yeah.
your guys' satisfaction. So the RMR that I get on the equipment versus the calculations that I typically take are usually pretty close. I like 88% of the time, that's a made up statistic, but 88% of the time, like I would say that it's within that range that I would expect it to be. And very infrequently do I get, outliers.
So okay, but are we saying RMR or BMR here? Because like I feel like isn't the calculation you're estimating for calorie maintenance going to be BMR, not RMR, and RMR is going to be like the actual like resting measure from the core.
So when I'm taking measurements, we're assuming RMR because somebody has already gotten up, they've left their home, they've probably had water that morning already, even if they're fasted, they've come to the lab. And so we have to add in that additional uh, 10-ish percent to account for that, in addition to whatever their activity factor is.
Okay, just making sure I'm following a little bit here. That's all.
Mhm.
And then
Because and maybe is the question about the difference between the BMR and the RMR?
yeah, the question, like, because again, like an RMR, to my understanding, and you've probably run far more than I have, because I think I've run one on a core machine, just to give you some, indicator of how infrequently we do it. Um, it's I don't know what let's just call it 1,800 calories with the RMR, right? To my understanding, that range for the RMR for most people would probably be somewhere between like what 1,600 to 2,000 more or less from the machine after going through the test, and then your estimation factors of like whether or not you have lean tissue or using all those other parts of the equation then give you that kind of estimation, which would be 10, 20, 30% higher for actual estimated maintenance calories.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So if you ask me what somebody's like as far as like what I would expect them to be 16 to 2,100,
Mhm.
I typically wouldn't answer the question like that. I wouldn't be like, oh yes, most people fall within this range. Just because again, body composition and activity level does play a role. I will tell you that with most males that I test, and this is not saying that everybody has this as their RMR, but I will say the numbers that I see most frequently for males is typically between 19 and 2100.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That seems to track.
I have had a couple of females come in. Like I said, I had one female, she was actually peaking prior to a CrossFit competition, and she was actually at the higher end. I actually tested her out at around, I think it was almost 1900. And she was a rather petite female, so I do see outliers occasionally.
So then, again, I think we're probably diving into the weeds here because it's fascinating because it's a tool that like we don't use a whole hell of a lot. I know Shane, how many RMR
Dude,
tests?
you know how many RMRs I have? Okay, so Susan, I have this 2 boxes in like this heavy duty closet of like the RMR kits, you know, that little
Yeah.
just like little this. They sent like 1,000 of those. It's just in the closet, and I used one to try it on myself. I got 1871 for my calories or whatever,
Mhm.
and then I did my VO2 max. I connected it to my VO2 max and the RMR thing there, and I think it changed the equation a little bit or whatever. I don't know, or just attach it to the account, and then we just never do it. We just never. You got like a bunch of these, you know, cardio coach things. Like it's interesting. I don't know why we never really use it. I think it's just like one more step, right, Marcos, with like diagnostics of the day, the performance diagnostics.
I think maybe it's also exposure too, right? Like you're not
Yeah.
going to find a lot of dietitians who conduct metabolic testing or VO2 testing. There are some instances where they do it in a clinical setting for vented patients, but like Bob Seebahar comes to mind. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. So Bob Seebahar was a big inspiration, I would say, of mine. He's written a couple of books. He does metabolic testing as well. No, but there's not a lot of dietitians, even in my circle, who are actually doing RMR and VO2 testing.
Then answer
Yeah.
this: which one do you find more valuable, the RMR or the VO2 test? If you were to pick one or the other, which one would you prefer to perform if you had limited time? Because I think that goes into like why we run VO2,
Yeah,
Seamus.
because
Because
we run like they were run with like brain performance and central nervous system labs, you know, strength and conditioning, VO2, then DEXA. So it's like it's like so many things. But yeah, to continue on, which one would you find more
It
valuable?
depends on the person. If I'm working with someone who is a significant amount of, so the profile that we talked about, right? We kind of got into it and then we're kind of going off on a tangent now. So I'll bring it back. So, like the avatar that we created that we were talking about, that would be a great person for RMR versus a VO2 test, because one of the other interesting things that you can see when you're conducting an RMR test, if you have the right equipment, because not every piece of equipment does this, is you can look at somebody's respiratory quotient and you can kind of see where they're sitting at. And in practice, I will tell you that the less metabolically efficient or flexible, whatever you want to call them, a person is, the more likely they are to have altered blood sugar levels, the higher that RQ is when I test them at rest.
This is so interesting because now I want to argue for VO2 max for this guy because like I mean we just love VO2 max, but it's like
well, no, but you also gave her the pretenses of stressed
yeah,
out individual, high
yeah,
cortisol. You're gonna literally do like the most
Yeah.
stressful thing.
intensively demanding test that exists in a clinical
Yeah.
setting. So I
Yeah,
understand where Susan's coming from here.
I think
So when
And
we
like
look at,
triaging.
and I'll even make the argument for longevity purposes, right? So even if we're looking at it for longevity purpose, right? If somebody's RMR is below their expected RMR, and then on top of that, we have an RQ that's coming up like 0.9, 1. I've even had some obese clients come up as like 1.1, right? Then there's like some major longevity implications that go along with that.
Dang.
Um,
wait,
and so
Yeah,
can you
go
hold
can
that
ahead.
you
thought really
explain
quick?
those
Can
like
you
Yeah.
can
more
you explain?
elementary?
No. Yeah. Can you go back and we understand it, but like we want our audience to know like what it is you're talking about in that with that RQ of why that's like clinically significant and why it's an indicator that there's like poor metabolic like signaling there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at respiratory quotient, we're looking at oxygen consumption versus carbon dioxide blow off, right? And so when we look at the ratio of those two things, and there's a couple other metrics we can look at too, but if we look at the ratio of those two things, it essentially tells me what you're burning is a fuel source. Are you burning fat as your predominant fuel source? Or are you burning sugar, carbohydrates as your predominant fuel source? And for somebody at rest, the body is preferentially going to want to burn more fat as a fuel source. However, if we are in an instance where we might be experiencing altered blood sugar levels, what I tend to find is that they are going to be higher on the sugar burning side, and that is going to be represented by that RQ close to 1.0. When we have an RQ closer to 0.7, then we're seeing higher utilization of fat as a fuel source, which we should see at rest closer to 0.7. 0.85 would even be okay. But once we start to get above that, that can show us that there could be some problematic issues there with maybe some metabolic efficiency, right? The body being able to burn fat at rest and then switch back from fat to carbohydrate utilization, blood sugar. And so that's one of the things that I look for when you are blowing off a lot of carbon dioxide. That's usually a byproduct of sugar burning, carbohydrate burning. Right. And so that's what the test is picking up.
See, finally, someone explained it, because we have so many members. They're like, I got this lumen thing. And they're like, I'm in the fat burning zone, or I'm in the carb burning zone. How do I blow into this thing and then I'm supposed to eat this way today? And it's like, maybe, who knows? But
well, the goal is to be able to switch to either fat or carbohydrate utilization when it suits you, when it's going to support you, right? That's what metabolic efficiency really is, right? When I wake up in the morning, right? Ideally, as I go about my morning, I should be more fat burning friendly, If I consume carbohydrates before I get into a high intensity training session, then at that point, that system that's going to burn through that sugar should be flipping on, right? And I should expect that, but then 2 hours later, right? Like after my training session, maybe after I've had my recovery meal, like depending on the training session, depending on the training plan, right? Ideally, I would want to see sort of my metabolic efficiency kind of come back on and be able to, again, be utilizing fat as a fuel source once I'm at rest.
So the question here that I have, because I feel like they ran this experiment post VO2, so post getting anaerobic and seeing how long you maintain that higher, in this case, carb burning state, not fat burning state, which is kind of
like epoch.
yeah, the epoch effect is actually going to be more of like a carb burning state, right? You're saying that like shuttling in more of those carbs in that state, assuming again this person move to a healthy metabolic profile, would make more sense so that you can kind of get that metabolic flexibility, quote unquote. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if yeah, I mean, how many RMRs have you run, out of curiosity?
Out of my entire career,
Mind you, I've only done one, two.
the first 4 years of my career, I was doing them pretty consistently. And then I had probably a good break. And then the last 3 to 4 years, I've been running them consistently again. So if I had to guess, my God, let's
Couple
see, how many
hundred.
months is in 4 years?
48. So you do like
48? I'm probably closing in on 800.
ooh, okay.
Dang, bro.
Could be overestimating a little bit because I'm just thinking like even that first 4 years of my career, I was probably averaging 10 a month.
Yeah,
But
that makes
but what you're saying though is like a
Yeah.
lot of dietitians don't necessarily approach like that's like a, I don't know if you would agree, but like that's more of like that performance approach, right? From that diagnostic, like using an RMR, using the VO2, we're I mean we're still helping with their metabolic stuff, but it sounds like more of that performance based approach as opposed to like tube feeding and kind of stuff that like other dietitians would do.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I always take it from a performance approach.
yeah.
Like even for that avatar that we talked about, right? I want that person to take it from a performance approach. One, because it's novel to them and so it's exciting and so it can make a big difference just in terms of like mental motivation. And also, one of the things I think that we don't do very well when we're coaching people around nutrition is we're not laying out a clear path for them versus if we set out a periodized plan and they have a roadmap to follow, they have particular checkpoints, they have endpoints, they tend to trust the process a little bit more. So regardless of whether or not you consider yourself an athlete, I think you have to program your nutrition out in phases, even if you're still struggling with your training a little bit.
Hmm. It's funny because I think, like you said, to like get the kind of like instilled motivation as a result of it, like even if that number comes as a shock to them, not necessarily to you, as to like where these caloric numbers need to be, but like it's like this is a fine-tuned instrument that helps me like give a very precise level of, quote, starting point, and therefore their buy-in could be like exponentially higher for. I feel like we ran our test for like $150, $200. I don't even know what the cost is on it because again, it's so infrequent. But I never thought of it from that like lens because I did actually have someone here recently ask about like getting started with an RMR. I was like, yeah, dude, like I could provide that to you, but I don't really know if that'll help you. But he saw it from some TikTok influencer. And I guess in this case, I should lean into it more. But like again, I'm like, I could do it, but like I don't even know if I have a hose because we haven't ordered any in a hot minute.
Just take some from Beverly Hills, bro. There's like 50 of those.
Yeah.
Oh, that I
Yeah.
know
And I
that.
think, there's a process to it too, right? So the machine will spit out numbers, but there also like comes a level of experience that like, okay, do these numbers look correct based on what you've told me about your lifestyle, what I know about your lab work, right? Most of the time when people tell me what their physical activity level is, I'm always underestimating that number, right? And so even if I get an RMR, and even if somebody gives me a food log, even if somebody tells me what their physical activity level is, the reality is I still have to take into account that activity factor. I have to trust what you're telling me. And so there is still some nuanced like calculations that I have to do on the top end if I want to. But the RMR number that I'm getting from the machine, right? That does still tell me a lot about just where you are in, and I joke with people all the time, but I'm like, I could look at your RMR and your VO2 numbers, and I can probably tell you a lot about yourself without you having to tell me anything at all.
Agreed.
Good
Mm-hmm.
point. VO2
Yeah.
is like that fifth vital sign, on top of temperature and heart rate and all those other things.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marcos.
Mm-hmm.
And Susan, so like in that instance too, right? Like because you're so attuned to that, like you've obviously probably created your own little like trends in your head as you've observed running these tests and seeing how things are behaving. Like what is like one of the things that like a textbook doesn't necessarily tell you about this that you've noticed in doing so many of these?
That's a good question. That is a good question. There's,
I'll tell you mine after your details,
yeah,
or I can go first if you'd like to hear it.
yeah. You go first because I'm gonna have to think about this one.
Yeah, so I mean, we're 7 years in now almost, and I've probably run almost 1,000 VO2s at this point, right? So I'd say like that's probably a fair estimation. And in that, like the one thing I've observed, and again, like I didn't go to school for it. It may have been in a textbook, but like this is my informal education to it, was heart rate variance, not variability, right? So one's ability to go from a resting heart rate to peak heart rate, and if that was exceeding 100 beats, I pretty much knew that this person was probably not lying to me about like doing some level of like physical activity more often than not. And then also, like as I observed it more and more, I was like, let's play this game. Like, what is the upper limit of this variance? And I think the most that I've seen is like 120 or 130 beats from like resting pulse to peak exertion on VO2. Um, I'm sure there's probably one more than that, but like that, like in this case, I'm using my own data because I'm like, I go from like, I've had like a resting heart rate like in the 30s, and then my peak VO2 got up to like 169. So it was like 130 beats.
Yeah.
And I'm not even like that well
Yeah.
trained. Again, this is more of like a clinical population that doesn't have like a healthy user biking bias because we use VO2 tests on bikes.
Who's biking, which is like submax VO2. But it's interestingly enough, when I was doing my VO2s, I want to tune in here a little bit, Susan. But like my exercise phys professor, who was a cardiologist at like UCLA, was saying like one thing you'll notice too, Marcos, when you run enough of these, he's like, a healthy heart is like if you start exercising with the first minute, there should be a plus 20 within a plus 15 to 20. It should be able to jump up. It should be able to produce work. And that was one of the things that I look at when I'm looking at someone. I'm like, is their heart moving or not? Like, are they taking forever to get going, even though like their lungs, their ventilation capacity, all these things are going? Like, what's going on? The heart, a
So
healthy heart, like at that rate, needs to be able to move.
plus 20 from like resting measure, like from blood pressure
Yeah,
cuff.
like a resting measure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to look more into that now that you mentioned that, because I'll be
Or at
reading.
least on the heart rate monitor, from what I remember in my exercise physics class. He's like, at least get that 20 beats up, like somewhere around 15 to 20. Like, that like he's ready to do work, like, or like this person's ready to do work and they're about to go into
I've known you for how long,
a
and you've
hard.
held that nugget from me?
Dude, there's a bunch of nuggets. Dude, I mean, the other nuggets that I've always wanted to do, but I think it's also a cost thing and just like a practicality thing, is lactate. Um, is
Mm.
I don't know if we want to like be drawing blood from people's ears or thumbs like while we're doing that, but I've done that before in a lab. I was the guinea pig, and it's like I was hitting the mile run, and he's like, "Don't kick." Don't, at like 0.90, he's like, "Don't kick," because like you're like that you will actually like rip yourself off this treadmill, and it's like going incline, and he's getting like the lactate, getting the blood cuffs, all this stuff, and it's like five people are around me while I'm doing this like run, and he's like, "Don't kick," and I'm like, "I want to kick," but I realized as soon as I hit the mile, I was like, "Yes, I'm absolutely not kicking." Like it was like the hardest mile of my life.
Mhm.
But yeah, lactate, dude, is something that I've always wanted to try, because even though we talk about like zero point 0.8 millimolars or like certain talking things, I'm like, I know some athletes are able to handle more lactate than others. And the way we think about lactate, there's companies out there that are like, oh, this will lower your lactate. I'm like, why would you want to lower lactate? Like you want to lower hydrogen ions, but not necessarily the lactate, because that could still be a buffer, that could still be a fuel,
Yeah,
especially
you
for
could
the brain.
recycle it.
You can recycle it. And so I'm like, why are there certain things? So I kind of like, my professor made me think about lactate and different things a little bit differently. And one more thing here, as soon as you find your answer, one thing he did say is like, if you really did want to know what was going on in the body, what you'd have to do is create a scientific study where as soon as you did that mile run sprint from the track, you like crash out on a mattress and someone biopsies your leg,
Hmm.
and to see that requires that requires so many moving pieces that it's like unethical on so many things, and it like you'd have to like time it so perfectly. That's why like there's that monitor that I've seen on that it's like a nitric oxide monitor, like a CGM on someone's like quad. Like a lot of crossfitters have been
Hmm.
using it. Like they're trying to like see what other labs there are. There's gonna be some point where there's going to be a monitor that like monitors all this without all these moving pieces.
Sure. I mean, we have continuous glucose monitors. I'm surprised that somebody hasn't already started to patent a continuous lactate, microneedle sort of
Yeah.
device. It'd be interesting to see. So I actually just ordered a lactate monitor because we don't do lactate testing right now, but I'm always interested. I have been interested recently in diving a little bit more into that along with the test. You know what, like not to jump, but I'm going to answer your question still. But when we do VO2, and I have somebody who's RQ, I'm taking them to a certain sub-max pace. And, some individuals are RQ, as soon as they hit 1.02, they're like, I'm done, right? And then I have some individuals who are like 1.17, and I'm like, oh my God, you're still going. And like there's also just like a mental fortitude piece there, but it's always interesting because I'll ask them kind of subjective questions, be like, how do your legs feel? Like how, like, were you experiencing some burning? Like, was it your legs or your lungs that gave out first? Like, I'm always curious just to like kind of hear their responses. So I would just be interested in doing the lactate test to kind of just validate my own personal like thoughts around why some people can go
That's
much
that's my
further
that's
than
my more
others
exciting
as it
one
relates
about,
to lactate.
yeah, the lactate one. But yeah, what's something you've
The
noticed over doing
textbook.
almost 1,000 of these that you like outside of the textbook? You're like, this is so cool.
Well, I'll tell you, it's been kind of a trip because at least in my dietetics program, we don't talk about any of this, right? It's most dietetics programs in the US. I think there's probably more that are getting, you focus more in on sports during like your internship, if that's the direction you're going. Most dietetics programs in the US are still really clinically focused until you get to internship. You have like I had one sports nutrition class, I think, during undergrad, and it just wasn't enough for me. So I actually went on to get my master's in exercise science and then, of course, my TSAC. And so a lot of the education that I received around VO2, VO2 testing, all of this stuff happened outside of like the education system. And so like I sought out
Like,
different
bridge it together.
courses. Yeah, I mean that was the main reason that I got my master's in exercise science and not nutrition, is because I knew that I needed to be stronger in those areas to become the kind of coach that I wanted to be. So there was a lot about VO2 testing that it took me years to learn. I would say the thing that comes to mind for me right now that the textbooks don't teach you is just, and this only comes from experience, I think, is just being able to look at the numbers as they change and like already knowing what's happening with that individual, being able to read the numbers, right? Like if I'm incrementally increasing their stage, they're going faster, I'm upping their incline, whatever the case may be. And I can kind of look across the board at that RQ, their heart rate, right? Their respiration, right? And I can see where they're leveling out or where I need to push them a little bit harder. Because it's like a mixed bag of people that come in for testing. I have completely untrained people all the way up to, like these sponsored ultra marathoners that I see occasionally.
Those are the craziest ones with the like if they actually bike, right, Susan? Like you're like, dang, this guy could go all day. I gotta put this harder.
I test a lot of runners. Like 99% of the people I test do it on the treadmill. Like they don't even want to do it on the bike,
Because their
which
legs are
is
gonna give out. That's like it's like a proxy. They're like, I can do this all day on the legs. That's why I kind of like the bike, right, Marcus? I feel like I like the bike more than the treadmill. I find it safer. Most people are gonna be like decondition, roll an ankle. In my opinion, that's just kind of how I think about it. But the bike is like a proxy for like leg strength, and you're like, haha, you thought you
yeah.
had good cardio, you do, but you don't got good legs. You don't got good legs.
Yeah. And I've done a fair amount on the bike for sure. But most of the time we're doing it on the treadmill for my military and like my more elite athletes. Like they want to do it sometimes under load, which I mean, a lot of times even when we're doing it under load, if we're doing an incline walking test, we get roughly the same numbers that we see during their running test anyway. And then I have a couple of crazy people who like to do it like on every piece of equipment that I'll test them on. And so they like want to do the bike, the treadmill. For my rehab guys, I've even done some on like an arc trainer because they just want to
That's
maintain their working
yeah.
capacity while they're not able to put a lot of load on.
I nerd about this with Jason, the guy who sent this to you, and I was like, I want to get the VO2 Master, the Bluetooth one.
Mhm.
And I played with it before. We've had it clinically. I want to go on the skier. I want to go on the bike or I want to do the row erg. Then I want to go do a sprint and see like what the differences are on each machine. I'm like, oh, I really suck at this machine. I haven't done it yet. I haven't pulled the trigger on like nerding out that much, like comparing my VO2s on different machines.
Yeah. I think the problem that I run into with the bike with some of my military guys is they're so used to running and they get on the bike and they tap out before they're really done. And so
Mhm.
it's difficult for me to like they would rather just like beat the pavement for 15 miles and suffer that way because they're used to it. You put them on a bike sometimes and we get to like 300 watts and they're like, "Oh, I think I'm done." And I'm like, "What do you mean you think you're done?" So
Two things, and then we can go back to like your baseline stuff. One, for the changing of modalities, so like the different like people that have done different ones, how much different is their peak number? Is it pretty substantial from like run to bike to all those different things, or do you notice it pretty similar?
I can't give you an exact percentage because I think just like the number of tests I've run on the bike is pretty small comparatively. I would say though that I always get like I feel like I'm always able to push them to a higher VO2 when I get them on the treadmill. But again, I think that a lot of that is the population that I work with, right? They're used to beating the pavement and so mentally they can handle it and they're willing to push themselves a little bit further. I have done so I had a wearable device that I was using with one of the organizations that I was working with for a while. And when I actually tested someone on the treadmill versus like an outdoor track as well too, like I could push them harder outside also.
Mm.
That was interesting to me because they seemed to, for whatever reason, be a little bit more comfortable outside. But that was only a handful of people, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's
I'm that guy. I like the track. I like the track. Marcos knows.
Yeah. Um, I actually have one to share here. We can look at mine with that VO2 number because obviously people, like you said, getting to like 1.0. Can you guys see this?
Dude, your VO2 pulse is like a 2706. Dang. I don't know how much. I'm gonna have to do a
Well,
calculation with that.
talking about
That's
like
pretty good.
1.0 for all this time,
Look,
whereas like was like
dude,
hardly
your
ever
left
aerobic.
ventricle must be huge, bro, because your max heart rate is like
Okay, I'm gonna get
161.
really like uncomfortably close to the camera, I think here.
You mean to
We're gonna
zoom in a little
screenshot
more?
that. Yeah, dude, for 154 for a 27 points VO2 pulse, like, dude, your left ventricle must be like lengthwise hypertrophied, really nice, bro. You have a good heart, Marcos.
I'm gonna die young. But yeah, like you said, it's like sometimes like it's so funny because it's like I feel like I mean, look, that was 107 beats, and it's like, oh, you're breathing out of proportion, like seemingly, but then you're just like
So
this
that's the
whole time.
like, and like your RER is like 7 minutes into the test, you're at almost 1.3, which is, I'd be interested to see your lactate.
I don't
That's what
know.
I want to see because I would love to
Yeah.
see how well he can handle. Because Marcos is a really efficient athlete. Because I bet you, and I know this, like, I don't think he probably hit a hard lactate like close to that high numbers that we could think about. It just his probably what 350 watts, probably like legs gave out. Your ventilation's at 141. Like, did your lungs feel like they were on fire?
Sorta like, and I think in doing, and that's like, again, I can give you instances of like, like there's, that's last year, almost a year ago now. And I have oh man, I wonder, hold on. I have a test going back when I was like peak CrossFit shape, and it was the same thing. Like, I don't know if that was oh, here I do. I have it from 2016. Different piece. It's on a parvo versus the core, but
God, that archaic.
yeah, but like same thing. Like, it's kind of interesting because like I wonder if there's some level of genetic like predisposition as it pertains to VO2. It's not loading
Absolutely. Yeah.
because like the data looks shockingly similar. Granted, I've been doing like the same kind of like training modalities for a while, right?
That's crazy though, because with cardio and like VO2, there is like for every decade, like there is like a bit of a marginal decrease. For you to keep it, obviously means you did the work. You did the work, but like you have a lot of cardio protective things going for you, dude.
Yeah, well, like look at that. So I was like 204 versus 199.1 on the
You got
scale
to
there.
zoom in a little bit more.
I am. I'm working on it.
It's okay. I'll just be awkward. It's fine.
There we go. So this was like me peak going into like CrossFit season, like 46.5 being like the peak. Same thing though, like wattage, like basically I teeter out the same time a decade later. And same thing, it's just like ability to just kind of stay in that like kind of, anaerobic thing for how,
Dude, you didn't even hit 1.1, meaning like I think your legs
Yeah.
gave out before you could
on
go.
well,
So
yeah, well, granted, that's like peak CrossFit conditioning, right? So it's like interesting, but like again, like they're not far off. I mean, like there's a whatever 10%
you know,
decrease
4.21 liters. The other one was like 4 point something as
to
well.
yeah, I was like, yeah. And I just found it fascinating because I went back and I looked at these data points and I was like, it's kind of interesting because I don't know how many people like had access to that like earlier in their lives to be like, oh wow, like here's me at 22 and here's me at 32, right? And being able to kind of look at that because like, seemingly like you probably won't have a better state of conditioning. And again, like I was like, I wonder if it changed. And like that other one, like changing modality, I was like actually running a little bit. And all it did was like apparently extend the amount of time I'm dealing with being anaerobic, seemingly based on the RER. Right. So I was just like, I guess my body just likes to go there and just suffer for whatever reason. It does not like using oxygen whatsoever.
The pain cave, bruh.
Yeah, well, there is a genetic component, right? I think the last thing I read, I'll have to dig for it, but I think anywhere between like 30 to 40% potentially of your VO2 can be genetically predetermined, right? I will tell you, so like if I'm working like with firefighters or SOF, right? For a firefighter, the expectation is that their VO2 should be at 42, right? For a
Damn.
firefighter to do their job well. If we look at SOF, if we look like normative, like research data, 45 to 60 is what's expected. With a large majority of the guys that I work with, I tell them that you should be able to get to 50 regardless of genetics. I personally believe, and I can't quote you a research article, right? But just based on what I've seen, I think for the special operations individuals that I work with, okay, this may not be everybody, but I think 50 is trainable.
I like that because
Yeah.
when you're thinking of a firefighter, how much weight do they have to add on to their body?
It could be 100 pounds depending on their, you know, the tank, if they're carrying hose, like mask, helmet, like all, like if we're carrying equipment, you're talking about 100 pounds. If you're looking
So
at
if
like a
you
special
added that
operations individual, it
VO2,
could be
yeah, if you
100 to
added that,
120 pounds.
yeah, so if you added that equation, their weight, their VO2, but you put 100 pounds on it, where would it put them, right? That's the kind of question, right? Because that weight is part of that equation with the VO2. So it's like hitting 50. And whenever I see people start to hit 50, I go like, yeah, you're starting to hit the range where it's like, it's time for real work. Like this is where like the pros kind of the lower end of like where pro athletes probably are, and they're going to be higher, right? Um,
But
but I
wouldn't it
like
be
that
almost,
because it's like,
Seamus, though, like to your point, though, if you're adding weight, you're adding a factor in the wrong direction. Because if you're adding load to the system, wouldn't you technically want to subtract that number? Because like there's more strain on the system, not like actual weight of like, like your body weight. Because like if it's milliliters per kilogram per minute.
yeah, I'm making like a theoretical, like I would say like a theoretical like kind of approach to this because it's like, yeah, you do want to subtract weight to help with the VO2 increasing because that's like I say this all the time, right, Susan? It's like if someone's 100 pounds overweight, like I see that all the time. I'm like, this is your VO2 right now, but if we did this calculation at you at this weight based off your DEXA, we could take off like 50 pounds from you or whatever. Look at what would turn into. I'm just kind of doing the inverse of that, Marcos, where it's like someone that has to put on weight like a firefighter with all this stuff, if they have a high VO2 and then they have to add all this weight, a person with a higher VO2 is likely to endure in a high stressful situation with all that weight, is what I'm
Yeah, I
thinking.
see what you're saying. You're just saying like the additive is going to lower it, but if that number is still able to get up to like 40 or 50 with that strain of the load being a factor would be, that's interesting. Okay.
I would say that strength is a bigger factor in load carriage for these guys than VO2 itself, right? So obviously you have to have a baseline. There's like a certain amount of VO2 that you need to have in order to navigate stairs, the type of, terrain that you're going to see and do so under load. But I think a big factor, particularly in the military with load carriage, and I would say even in firefighting, is posterior strength, right? And so you have to have a mix of both. Right. And so when we talk about hybrid athletes, tactical athletes are the ultimate hybrid athlete, right? So VO2 and that work capacity is only one piece of the equation, right? That
Yeah.
posterior chain and particularly back strength is where it's at. Does that always mean that they need to gain weight? No, not really. Sometimes I have guys who are like 210 come through my office door and they're a little bit chunky, but they're fast as hell and they're strong and they could stand to lose a little bit of body fat and it's just going to make them better. I have guys who come through my door who are like 145 pounds, and they're doing the same work as the 210-pound guy. So do we absolutely need to put weight on a 145-pound guy? Yeah, absolutely. I joke with people. I'm like, if you weigh less than I do, then, we need to talk.
Would that mean they're indicated to get on some peptides, a little HRT? Like, how does that look like?
As a licensed healthcare professional, so yes, so we can definitely, go down that route. But so I think again, like it's a little bit more nuanced, right? It's not just about the VO2 number, right? But for the
Yeah.
guys that I work with, it's going to be a combination of your fitness potentially measured through VO2 and then your posterior strength and then your ability to just go far under load, right? Because you're going to spend hours under load potentially.
Yeah.
You're going to be under load for anywhere between 12 to 25 miles, right? Depending on what the task ahead of you is. So that's
Thank you
just
for
my 2 cents
enlightening us.
on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think from all the stuff that I've heard in every other podcast, this is kind of like refreshing to like have someone else like talk about like how the test is kind of even still hard to decipher, even though it gives you so much like good data. Because like you just said, like these individuals, I would be really interested to see because they don't like the bike, like what that number is, and then if you change like where that benchmark of like getting to 42 looks like, because I mean 42 on bike versus like 50 with running, even if you're not like a great runner, or like what that all like translates to is like been like my biggest question is like, like I don't know. I was never in an exercise science lab as a, exercise phys major or anything like that. So I constantly had that question of like, like this person told me they did a lot of running and I put them on a bike. Like, it seems like they're like probably not reaching their actual potential there.
Yeah, that's like more mode specific. That's why like my professor said this is like a kind of like a bad joke, but it's like because he runs now. But like when he was at his peak, Lance Armstrong, if you put him on a bike, his VO2 is pretty close or should be real close to his actual max because that's his mode of training. But you put him on running, and it's like, oh, yeah, or a different mode of cardio. It's like, god damn, it's like it sucks. Doesn't look like an athlete. It's kind of like a bad joke, but like it's very mode specific. That's why I think with the runners that Susan has, it's like they could do it all day, but you put them on something else, and it's like they're collapsing. It's kind of like Mike Boyle talks about this a lot. Like guys can squat like 1,000 pounds, but then you put them 50 pounds in each hand for a split squat, and they're like tipsy turvy.
Yeah. And there are some so I have some individuals that I work with who, they don't run a ton, but they want to run, right? So the mileage that they're putting in per run is anywhere between 1 to 3 miles, and their paces might be slower. So in that instance, if, we want to do their tests, we will sometimes default to the bike for that, or we'll do like a walking incline.
I didn't even know that was an option. That's cool. Then again, I do a
So
walking
the
incline.
walking incline.
Yeah, because I've just done some inclines and I'm like, dude, if you get to a 12 at like even a 3 speed, it is terrible.
I did a bulk the other day and I got my incline, I think, to 14% at 3.3 miles an hour.
Miserable. Like anything over 2.5 when you start getting over a 9 on that incline is like god awful, in my opinion. I can't keep cadence. Like I'm no longer walking. It's almost like a half skip jump kind of thing.
I was
I was
impressed that I could get that much dorsiflexion, so it was good.
good ankle there. I was run. My wife and I were running these hills. Like I was supposed to do like an easy run, and she's over here running for like a marathon, right? And I go to a Rose Bowl here in LA, and it's like relatively flat. It's like a circle. It's flat. Like it's my favorite place to run. It's an easy run. I could get in the zone. We run in our neighborhood, and I'm like the first 2 seconds, like I hate this. I hate this. I hate this. And it's like just the slightest like incline, but she's out here like zooming, and I'm over here like this was supposed to be an easy run. This was supposed to be an easy. I hate an incline. Like I don't think you can catch me dead doing one.
Yeah, no, I feel that pain. So when my husband and I were dating, I was the runner and he was not. And in his train up for his job, he became the runner. And then I hate to say stop running, but for all intents and purposes, I stopped running. And so now he's the better runner, and I'm the one who's suffering all the time. So
It builds back quick though. I mean, me and a buddy, we started training for High Rocks around ish this time last year. He kept going and he's doing a marathon, which he'll do in the next month or couple
yeah.
weeks. And I'm sure, and like he's been putting in the miles. And I was like, you wouldn't catch me dead. He's like, I just kept going when you decided that it was over. I was like, yeah, I was tired of the freaking running, especially like cold winters, and we're doing most of it on a treadmill. It was like you just mentioned, with certain people like would prefer it on the track. Get me outdoors to do that, no problem. But as soon as we were like putting in mileage on the actual like treadmill at the gym, I was like, nah, like I'm moving back to bodybuilding. Like that won't catch me dead running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we kind of took a tangent into like this area, but I think we have a few minutes to maybe discuss like, cool, you get this data, gives you this estimation, you get this thing. Seamus and I have often kind of called this phase baseline. And I think a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
coaches in the
Yeah.
periodization really like doing that because we got to get to know, like the psychological components to it, which is seemingly is what you're kind of alluding to here, right? Like gonna make a really good educated guess. We're gonna like see how you feel. We're not really chasing any type of deficit right away. We want to feel good and kind of get some feedback. How long do you like to keep people in that? Or is it like you kind of like you said, you teeter into a slight deficit to see if they're responsive? Like what is kind of your coach's checklist there?
Yeah, I mean, they're final like calories and macros. If, I'm calculating them out in that first phase, I'm still going to be really conservative with it. And so we might be teetering into a deficit a little bit, particularly for like that avatar that we discussed earlier. Cause I'm just, this is like a personal preference. I think just experience thing too is even if I'm working with someone who is really trying hard to be consistent and really kind of dial things in, there are some individuals that I work with that I know they're going to go off plan. Like I know they're going to overeat, right? And so sometimes I incorporate some of that wiggle room into their diet. Typically, I won't do that in that first phase. I'm going to put them at maintenance. I'm going to get, data back on how they've been doing as far as following it and then how their body composition has changed, but also their energy levels. right? And so there's a couple other subjective things that I like to talk about and ask about during that period of time. Bowel habits, for sure, being one of them, right? So a dietitian's favorite subject outside of food is typically poop. So we actually talk a lot about that because that what's coming out is often a reflection of what's going in. Hunger is another big subjective one that we'll talk about during that time, how strong your appetite is. We have a lot of issues within the tactical community with irregular eating patterns and appetite, if depending on when your shift starts and whatnot, and not having an appetite is a big red flag for me, right? So we'll take some of that subjective along with the objective to kind of determine how long that phase should be and what our big rocks are going to be. And then after that phase is when we might roll into that deficit. And again, in a deficit, a lot of times going to be really conservative. One of the things that we work to achieve is like, how can we get you to lose weight? How can we get you in a deficit? These guys don't want to count calories, right? And rightly so. Like, they just don't have the mental bandwidth to do so. So when we take that time to kind of set up that first phase and figure out what those big rocks are, and then get some routine established, once we get into that deficit phase, they have to count calories a lot less than they would on a traditional plan.
Yeah. It would be weird for a firefighter to be like in the middle of saving you. Hold up. I gotta pull out my fitness pal real quick. It's like, sir, what's going
Yeah.
on here?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that piece is missed, like that first phase where you're just establishing whether or not somebody is going to be able to do what you're asking them to do and whether or not their metabolism is healthy enough to be able to do what you ask them to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's I think very tried and true and very like telling. I mean, I'm assuming people when they come to you and sign up with you, it's kind of like a conclusion that like I need a few months, not a few weeks, in order for us to like really make like sustainable changes for you. I've kind of moved to that recently, and I feel like I've had a far better time. And sometimes it's accelerated based on their compliance, how good they are early on. And then also like reassuring them that like, yes, everything's exactly where it should be. And we can kind of like dip into that phase. I actually had a conversation with a client this last weekend about that. And she's doing great. And she's like, I thought it like not to be discouraged, but like we haven't like really seen any movement. I was like, hold the phone. Like I told you at week 1, we're at end of week 3, like I wanted to give it a little bit of time and understand, like you said, those subjective kind of cues and everything that's going on. And ironically, week 2, there was like, I think I'm having some bowel issues. It seems like a lot of protein. It's like, okay, like let's see if we can massage that a little bit and change things up a bit. Only to now be like into this week, she's like ready to go. She could definitely kind of handle it. She's very satisfied with meals, etc. But she hits me with like, I'm going out of town for 4 days. I was like, do you really think it makes sense for us to like put you in a deficit when you're gonna not really be in your normal food environment? And she's like, fair point. So like
Yeah.
learning how to improvise, adapt, and overcome, and be like, hey, we're going to do this. Here's your agenda for this week. Again, you're not going to be able to like log and track things to that level of precision that you're used to when you're at home, which is still a new thing to you. But like I was like, let's just take photos. Like you can just use the app to take photos of what's going on, feel good about it. And I was like, the one thing that usually gets people in trouble when they're vacationing, quote unquote, even if they're trying to be good, is that they have like no accountability to something, or you just kind of snack because you have like these eating family gatherings. I was like, build a plate just like you would at home, say like, this is what I'm kind of allotting, take a photo of it, and I guarantee you'll have a far better time. So I think there's a lot of things that have to go on for, again, this is just like a Mrs. Jones client, but like from the tactical people, it's like, yeah, like you haven't dealt with your first overnight shift yet. You told me that was coming, and here we finally are. How are we going to handle it?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, shift work is hard too, because as soon as you are on shift work or that third shift, right, we see an incremental, like the longer you've been on that shift, you see a rise in cortisol levels, right? Sleep deprivation, right? Just altered diurnal rhythms. And so all of those things kind of work against you in terms of like blood sugar regulation, appetite, hunger hormones, satiety hormones. And so that's one of the reasons that I do like periodization. So when we do it, right, we've just talked about the first couple of phases, but when I sit down with somebody, we're looking at like the next 6 to 12 months of your life.
Yeah.
And I want to like, we will put in not just like if I'm working with someone who has an athletic event coming in, of course we put in those events, but we're also looking at vacations, holidays, travel, kids events, right? Like, we're putting all of those things in your periodized plan for as far out as we can, up to 12 months. And then, and then we're looking at your training program, what that's potentially going to look like for the next 6 to 12 months. And then we're laying the nutrition over the top of that, right? So when we first start that roadmap, like the third thing we look at is nutrition, not the first thing, right? And that's because we can't make like the nutrition, we can't make your life fit into the nutrition plan for most people. The nutrition plan has to fit into your life. And so we start with your life first and we plan backwards to the nutrition instead, because it's really easy to just, even though things like nutrition and sleep have the biggest impact on everything, they are often the things that get dropped the easiest by these guys.
Yeah. No, thank you for that insight. That made me go, all right, got to change the intake form. Hey, what's the next 6 to 12 months look like? Seriously, point it out. When's the big holiday? When's the vacation? Like, I think that helps a lot, because then you can come into that first call like, hey, I've already formulated the plan for us. Like, I like the fat loss sprints, for example. Like, oh, we're going to do this time. And then, oh, now we know that this is the holiday, so we don't have to do it then or whatever. So, no,
It's
that's
the
awesome.
season
I
of
think
gains right now. October always starts the season of gains.
Yeah.
for
Right?
real.
Yeah,
Squattober.
absolutely.
Squattober, December coming soon. I mean, no, this has honestly been enlightening. I think we went really deep on like the exercise phys there, which is fun. So our audience, like, thank you for
Well,
like Chip
and I
clicking on.
appreciate it. And for everybody else that may have, it's like, okay, like we kind of tuned that out. Again, like this is a self-serving podcast for me and Seamus, and far too
Yo,
often we've
all
had
our
these
things.
like questions about like other practitioners outside of our scope of individuals that are running our VO2s, and we have conversations, but it's like here's someone else that's having a different like purview, and we want to kind of know,
Like
and
you
it's
have
like
a deep
super exciting for
knowledge base
us.
on it.
So
I
hopefully
know we
this,
didn't even talk about cholesterol.
well, that's what episode
That's what
2, that's what round 2 is for. We always
I'm
episode
ready.
2.
That'll be a whole hour and a
But
half
we'll do like
episode
a
on its
whole like
own.
metabolic panel pop, because you're always probably like dealing with labs and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
I know I threw it in there because I was personally like, I looked at my labs and I was like, what the fuck happened to my lipid profile? Like, everything was good, and then I realized Des was talking to me about it. So she mentioned like, you're having a lot of like salads, right? And I'm like, yeah. Like, do you put like the whole like seasoning on there? You're having a lot of red meats from that sausage. I was like, oh yeah, stupid. I wasn't thinking about this. And she's like, yeah, so I changed that. But Susan, no, seriously, thank you so much for this. We're over an hour, so I want to make sure that we'll get a part 2 and we'll do some other things. But
we'll keep it on
working with
track.
you,
Episode 1 is just getting the feeler for everybody, and then
yeah,
we like to
this is the
revisit.
big,
If you would be so kind as to come back for round 2, we'll have
yeah.
clear-cut guidelines as to like we're going to do a masterclass on one topic versus all over the
I'll
place.
probably have to do that, because if like anybody who knows me knows that I could talk for hours.
Well, we would love that, and I think that like to have that again, like that deeper dive and understanding from like the dietetic lens would be amazing, and I think so many people would love to know more about that specifically. But we wanted to get the the audience like familiar with you and just have a good time. And thank you for letting us kind of go on the tangents, even though we tried to stick to an avatar. This is just go back to our first episode. We had no clue what we were doing.
No clue what we're
Yeah,
doing. We
no,
sit
happy to
down
come back.
and we're
Happy
having
to
a good
come back.
time.
Yeah.
Susan, where can people find you if they're a tactical athlete looking to, if that they're kind of like that avatar looking at metabolic dysfunction, they're a tactical athlete, they don't know where to start, they're looking for some help. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me just about anywhere as Tactical Dietitian. So my Instagram handle's at tactical.dietitian. My website is the same, tacticaldietitian.com. I am typically always available for questions. My email is on my website. If you drop in my DMs, I'll probably see it. And so if you have questions, just reach out to me. One of my things that I love the most is just meeting people, even in an online space. My husband hates it. I am like the extrovert of extroverts. So please feel free to send me a message. I will absolutely respond to it.
Well, guys, you heard it first at tactical.dietitian. Basically, on every platform, we'll have things listed in the links below. I'm sure you've already seen them if you've been watching this episode on YouTube, which tends to be where a lot of people do get their information from us. And yeah, Susan, thank you so much for gracing us with a little over an hour of your time. Thank goodness like you said, that it worked in line with your schedule, being on the East Coast and also on the West Coast, and we're we're still trial and erroring our new times because Seamus decided to move to a different job, which means he has different availability. So I'm blaming you, bro. And it's okay. It's okay because it leads to great conversations. Drop us a follow, drop us a like, give Susan a follow over at her pages. Reach out. Like she said, she loves that authentic human connection. And until next time for part 2 with Susan, when we talk about something a little bit deeper, the macro perspective, we are out.